Guys, I'm so excited. I have been waiting to do this video specifically because I love being able to look back on everything I read and to depict what was my favorite. So today I'm going to be going over my favorite reads of 2022. It's a pretty extensive list. I wish I could have gotten it down to less books, but I think I'm the type of person that could like pretty much any book. Okay, let's get started. The first book that made it on this list is my most recent read, and that is Verity by Colleen Hoover. And this is my first read by Colleen Hoover. I will say I thought there was going to be more twists than what there was, but it still was amazing. This book, the ending really just kept you thinking, and it kind of reminded me of Shutter Island. The best part about this book is that after I finished reading it, I continued thinking about it, and I've still continued thinking about it. And there are so many different theories you can come up with to try to figure out what actually happened. And I love a good book that can make you think. The next book that made it on my favorites is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. And this is another murder, not so much mystery, but thriller, I guess. And this is about a girl who takes erotic photos of men. The photos that she takes of men are very degrading, but her work has become popularized in the public eye because they think it's art. But behind closed doors, it's much more sinister. This book kind of reminded me of American Psycho meets Hot Girl Summer. It was insane. This woman is completely unhinged and she has the entire world fooled. Again, another book that I read and could not stop talking about even now. It's really just reading about her life and reading about how bizarre she is and how odd she is and how she interacts with men and the way she thinks and getting inside the villain's head and then realizing what she's done. And then it really makes you think back to everything that you just read. And I absolutely loved this book. It was crazy. The next book that I loved was They Never Learn by Lane Fargo, and I'm so disappointed that I put off reading this for as long as I have. This is a dark academia novel, so if you like DA, pick up this book for sure. And it's kind of like Dexter, but a female. And it's about a professor who kills boys within her school who have committed unspeakable crimes. She's very good at covering it up until she's not. So that's what you end up reading about. You are reading from the villain perspective, which is just so much fun. You really get into her head. It's such a good book. I could not put it down. I just kept thinking, I need to finish this book right now. I need to know what happens. The next book that made it to my favorites is Under the Banner of Heaven. If you've seen the Hulu show, it's very similar, except this goes more into detail of Mormon history. This book is about Mormon fundamentalists, and it is the original teachings of Mormonism. So the only difference now is that they don't practice plural marriage. It goes through every crazy story in history that has resulted from FLDS, and it's absolutely insane. The reason I want to read this one specifically, though, is because the Lafferty story, which is what this book is about, happened in the neighborhood I was just living in when I was in Utah. It's insane. It's literally insane. It will blow your mind. The next book that made it on my list is The One by John Mars. And this is a story about a dating site that matches you with your perfect match based upon your DNA. If you've read the soulmate equation, yeah, it's kind of like that. This book, though, is so incredible because it has different point of views of different matches that were made through the dating site. You see a match of a serial killer that gets matched with a cop, and the serial killer is actively killing people in the town, and the cop has no idea. The Cop and the Serial Killer was definitely my favorite story. I could have read an entire book just about that couple alone, but every single relationship that they go over is so good and so intriguing, and I thought this book was a masterpiece. The next book that made it on my favorites is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. And this is a very dark story. It is about a teacher that grooms a 15-year-old girl. The whole story is from her point of view. Pretty much goes over from the point of her getting groomed up until an adult age to where she ends up developing Stockholm syndrome which is when people start developing positive feelings towards someone that has done something bad to them. So you get to see her whole mindset change from misremembering certain information to thinking that it was her that wanted the relationship in the first place and that she was actually in love with this man. As horrific of a story that this is, it is an art piece. If you were interested in reading it, I would read the trigger warnings first because this goes over some very dark, twisted truths. The next book that made it on my favorites, and this is a series, is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. This is a YA thriller, but towards the last book, it gets very, very dark. So this book is about 𝚑𝚒𝚘𝚔, and for her senior project, she decides to try to solve an unsolved murder that happened within her town, I think 10 years before. The book consists of interviews, text messages, emails, phone calls, and as you're reading it, it looks just like that. So it's almost as if you're uncovering this information, not that someone is telling you about it, which I really like. The first two books felt very YA to me. It wasn't too bad to read. It was kind of like any other murder mystery that I had read, but when it got to the third book, it made the first two books 1,000 times better. Because what happened in the third was it just made me so emotional, and it was so sad, not in the way that I would expect to be sad, if that makes sense. It was just, I became so connected with Pip, and she felt like a close friend, and then for what happened in the third to happen, and for the justice system to be so corrupt, felt too real to me, and oh gosh, this series was so good. The next book that really got me was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I did not expect for this book to go where it went because it doesn't tell you in the synopsis where it's going to go. The baseline of this story is that a man wakes up on a spaceship with no recollection of how he got there, doesn't know his name, can't remember anything, and the crew that is on board is dead. So as you are reading, he slowly starts to uncover who he is, why he's there, what he needs to do, and why everyone is dead. And I've never read a story quite as realistic as this one. This one felt so real, as if this were to happen, it would happen like this. It was impeccable. And since we're on the topic of sci-fi, the next book that made it on my list is The Murderbot Diaries by Martha Wells. And this is a whole series of books, and they're little novellas. They consist of like 150 pages. So when you're reading them, it feels like it's going so fast, but there is an entirely complete story from beginning to end in each one. And there's so much that takes place as a whole collective series. What the series is based on though is a AI robot called a Murderbot. A Murderbot is his nickname because they can kill people. They're strong enough to kill people, but they are called sec units, and they act as security for exclusive government projects or just security for the high class. It is fast paced, it is thrilling, it is adventure packed, and there's so much that takes place. And it's also a bit funny, which I didn't expect. I was able to get such a good visual from reading everything, and everything was described so beautifully. It makes it feel as if it's more real. And I think that's why I loved this series so much. And I haven't even finished the series. I think there's about 7 of these books in total, and I'm only on the 3rd. Since we're on series, I figured I would talk about the next one, and that is the Legend series. And I only have the 2 in print. I need to get the other one. So if you're a fan of Maze Runner, Divergent, The Hunger Games, those top tier dystopian novels, then this is a trilogy you have to read if you haven't read it. The first book takes place in a dystopian Los Angeles, which in my opinion is the worst place to be if something bad happened. And it is based upon this boy named Day who goes against the government and is kind of this icon for people who can't go against the government. There's also this plague that is going around that they are trying to find a cure for, and this is such a gripping novel with great characters, and you will not want the book to end. That is like my favorite thing when it comes to reading a trilogy. If you aren't yearning for the next one, it's not very good, but this one I had to buy the book immediately after I was done because I needed to know what happened next. The next trilogy that made it on my list is Shadow and Bone. I know I'm late to the game. I'm not a huge fan of fantasy. Ever since I've read Harry Potter, I've never found a book like it that made me feel the way that book made me feel, or even slightly had my interest. And I've read other fantasy novels and I could not get into it, but these books really did it for me. This world, the 𝚱𝚘𝚘𝚔 was incredible. And I don't know if it's because I watched the series on Netflix first, but I thought it was so good. So essentially this trilogy is about dark versus light. In the shortest version, that is truly what it's about. And it's a world that consists of magical people with magical abilities, and then there is also people that are just normal humans. It's about this very dark, ominous fold that has been created by dark magic as a divide between their country. The only means for destroying this fold is by finding a sun summoner who emits sun from her body or light from her body to light up the fold and destroy the darkness. Our protagonist ends up being that girl. So you end up following the story from her point of view and going through her figuring out that she has powers and all the things that she now has responsibility of doing because she is now the sun summoner. And there is this crazy love triangle that consists between the most evil person in the country and just a normal human boy. And what's so awesome about this trilogy is that there's a continuation of books that consist within the 𝚱𝚘𝚘𝚔, and that's what the world is called. So once you get through the first book and you've read about the world, then you can go on to the other books and understand all of those 1,000 times more, which is really cool. I'm just gonna go to the next trilogy because we're on the topic of it, and that is the Maze Runner trilogy. Again, I'm behind on this, I know. I loved the first 3 books. Chef's kiss for me. I thought it was done so well. Do not watch past the first movie. If you do read these books, they're absolutely horrific. It's awful. They are not actually based on the books at all. It's very sad. The first book is so captivating. It's such an amazing story. The entire time you're just trying to figure out why are they there, what's happening, and as you move on into the second and third books, there are so many more twists that come around at every quarter, and it feels like everything is a setup, and I just absolutely loved this series. In fact, I loved it so much after I read it, that was when I looked up Legend, the Legend series that I just mentioned previously, because I wanted to read more books that were similar to this one. So this story, you probably know what it is, but it's about a boy that gets dropped into a maze with a bunch of other boys, and he has no idea how he got there. But for some reason, he is the only one that has been able to advance in the maze further than anyone else. So everyone starts to question who this boy is. I love Thomas. And the Scorch Trials, when he goes to that party in the middle of the dystopian city, I was melting. Okay, moving on to the next book, which is Bunny by Mona Awad. And I've already raved about this book, but I'm gonna do it again. So Bunny is about a group of girls, think of Mean Girls, but more sinister, and they call themselves Bunny. Our protagonist goes to school with these girls, and she finds these girls absolutely repulsive, and I'm pretty sure that they are in college. One day, the bunnies end up inviting our protagonist, I forget her name right now, totally blanking, to a exclusive party that they throw every year. And she ends up going and she never comes back. She ends up falling down a rabbit hole. This story is so weird and unhinged and sinister, and it's pretty much about a murderous cult. And you get to see someone go from hating something to becoming something and not knowing how to escape it. And it is such a ride. You never know what's gonna happen. I was so shocked reading some parts of this book because I just didn't expect what happened to happen. I remember sitting there reading it and just my mouth dropping open in shock of what I was reading. And mostly because I've never read a book or a story like this one, the ideas some authors come up with, like, I have 3 romance reads. I'm just gonna put them all together because there's only 3. So the first one is The Love Hypothesis. And I absolutely loved this because it is so rare to come across a book that has a female protagonist that is doing something science related. And I think that's really cool, and it's something that should be acknowledged. And I really enjoyed the realistic take on females working within a male-dominated field. And because I am kind of within, not technically the STEM field, more the STEAM field, a romance that takes place within a STEM environment is everything I could hope for and more. This is also the very first book that I read that made me feel like I was doing something wrong. I was reading the spicy part of this book on the plane, and I started turning red because I was worried someone maybe read what I was reading. I was like looking around like this. It was making me hot. I was sweating. It was too spicy to read in public. I'm not normally a fan of the spicy scenes, but that book was just out of this world. I think the buildup and the fake dating trope is just, oh, I love the fake dating. And that takes me to the second favorite romance book of 2022, which is The Unhoneymooners, and that also consists of fake dating. This one's even more intense, I think, because they have to fake be married to get a free honeymoon vacation on the island of Maui. I've been to Maui before, and I remember standing on the beach watching the sunset by myself thinking, man, it would be so nice to be here with someone I was in love with. Reading this book made me feel like I was falling in love on the island. It's exactly what I would imagine would happen if I was there with someone I loved, or you know what I'm saying. So I literally was living vicariously through the girl in this book. And the third romance book was Beach Read by Emily Henry. Augustus Everett is the epitome of like the perfect guy in my head. He's like grungy, he's weird, he likes books, he likes writing. Does anyone else feel the same way? I really enjoyed the chemistry that these two characters had. Also just seeing how weird Augustus was. Like, I enjoyed getting to know Augustus. The next book, and this is a very unexpected favorite, is The Silver Eyes, 5 Nights at Freddys, and this is a YA thriller. The reason I even found this book is because I was at Barnes & Noble and I was standing in the YA section, and this little girl that was probably 10, she was like, oh my gosh, look, they have the entire 5 Nights at Freddys series. I really want to get it. I was like, okay, if this little girl says it's good, it's probably really good. I don't know why I trusted her, but I did, and it's really good. So 5 Nights at Freddy is based off of the video game. It's pretty much a Chuck E. Cheese that consists of this scary animatronics, but the animatronics are evil and they come to life. The reason I like the first book the best, though, is because after the first book, it kind of started leaning more on the unrealistic side and fantasy side, but the first book felt very realistic. It's about this girl that goes back to her hometown of Hurricane, Utah, and that location alone is terrifying because I've been there multiple times, and of all places for something like this to take place, it would be that town. So she goes back to Hurricane, Utah to reunite with all of her friends from high school, and they decide to go find Freddys. In order to get to Freddys, though, they have to go through an abandoned mall, and it is so creepy because it just reminds me of the times that I would go out with my friends and sneak into an abandoned old house and, you know, go ghost hunting. But this book was as if you did that and then something actually went wrong. It is just extremely creepy, and there's so much more to it than what I'm just saying. And for a YA, it was great. The next book is The Selection. I didn't expect to like this book as much as I did. I liked the first 2 books, but the first one was definitely my favorite. It's pretty much The Bachelor, but royal edition. 30 girls get selected to go to the castle to get to know Prince Maxton, to hopefully get selected to become the queen. This is another story where there's much more than just what you think. It's not just getting to know Maxton and seeing the other girls get to know Maxton, and there's more of a political side, and there's also a love triangle, and I love a good love triangle. I can't say it enough. The next book that made it on my favorites is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I'm not entirely sure if I would love this book as much as I did if it didn't take place where where I grew up, at locations I've been to many times. It's easier for me to enjoy a book when I know where it takes place, because it almost makes it exist in reality. So this book is about two musicians, a band and a singer, that end up getting together. It takes place all over LA, and it's pretty much sex, drugs, and rock and roll. You get to read about their entire experience as a band and all the crazy things that they did. And the cool thing about it is that it consists of a bunch of interviews. You are kind of like the interviewer interviewing the interviewee. The entire story consists of dialogue. It's just you being told what happened from the bandmates. It's very cool. The next book is Coraline, and this is by Neil Gaiman, and I think he is one of my favorite authors because this man is a freaking genius. I have never read so many different books in so many different genres that are incredible except by this man. Coraline is about a girl named Coraline who ends up moving to this new town. And while she is there, she finds this little door that she ends up going through, and it sends her to her exact house, but it looks better and her family is cooler, except the only difference is they have button eyes. That alone is terrifying. This is also one of my favorite movies of all time. The one thing I do wish about this story though, which makes me so upset, is that I wish it was longer. I wish there was a second one because it's such a good story. I wish there was a continuation of it or someone else that goes into the house. Like, truly, I do. Now we're gonna move on into some classic reads because I have 3, so I just figured I'd mention them all together. So I have 1984 by George Orwell, and I know I'm late to the game reading this. I'm aware. This is definitely one of those staple books you have to read, like Fahrenheit 451, Brave New World. It is a top tier read, and it's one of those books that ages so well, which is why it's a classic. And I had no idea that the term Big Brother watching came from this novel. 1984 is about a dystopian world where you have no free will. You can't have a creative thought in your head that is outside of the way that the government thinks that you should think. And the only information that you know is the information that the government tells you, and it's to keep you kind of, in this box, hidden from the world and what the world actually is. Big Brother is always watching, kind of like the TV would be watching you. So if you said something out of line, you will be demolished. But the story in general ends up following our protagonist, who starts thinking on his own and realizing that the way of the world is wrong, which is kind of how those staple books go. The next book I loved is Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, and it's essentially about what the title is, Crime and Punishment. It's about a man who ends up committing murders and how he thinks that he can fight off his human nature and get through life and be okay knowing he did what he did, but in reality, he cannot. I think out of all the classics I've read, this is definitely one of the more entertaining ones, and it's very philosophical. It is very meaningful, and I think it's a super good read. If you're looking to read a classic, this is one I would recommend. And on the opposite spectrum is The Stranger by Albert Camus. The reason this is on the opposite end is because this is about a man who kills someone, but instead of his guilt eating him alive, he is totally serene. He's okay with dying. He accepts that he did something, and his attitude towards his ultimate death isn't going to change his ultimate death. And I really liked this book because such a powerful meaning. And it's a short one too. So if you haven't read this one, couldn't recommend it more. We're finally getting down to the last books. This is really exciting because I know this is a long video. Thanks for sticking it out with me. So we've got The Silent Patient. I feel like I read this so long ago. This is by Alex Michaelides, and this is a thrilling read. This book is about a woman who ends up killing her husband, and after it happens, she goes entirely mute and she never talks again. This therapist decides to try to get her to talk and recall the memories to figure out what actually went down. I did not expect for the ending to end the way it did. I had no idea where it was going, and it's very hard for me to get shocked by all the murder mystery books that I read, but this was shocking. Because of the way that this turned out is what made it so incredibly good for me, and I thought that he did it very well, and it's a story I will never forget reading because of it. The next book with a really crazy ending is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart, and guys, look at this. I got a used book signed. Can you believe this? It's freaking crazy. This book I read in just a couple of hours. The beginning of this kind of reminded me of a dark academia novel because they seemed like a very privileged group of kids going to their own private island for the summer where they all have these houses. This story was a little bit slow for me though because I didn't really understand where it was going, but once it got to the end, that was when I was like, oh gosh, now I have to reread everything because I wasn't paying enough attention. And because of how it ended, made the book so spectacular because then you're now finally understanding what was happening. Parts where it felt slow, it actually wasn't slow at all. So you really just got to push through all the way to the ending if you think that it's, not too interesting for you. I promise once you get to the end, it's worth it. I read a lot of self-help books at the beginning of the year, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint what self-help book is my favorite because they all kind of do the same thing and they all kind of say the same thing. So I'm only putting one on the list, and this is one that I look to all the time, and I think it's really helpful. So this is the 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth by John C. Maxwell, and he's my favorite self-help author. The reason it's my favorite is because it has just 15 laws of growth. And it's all things that you would know, but things that you probably don't think about often, at least for me. So if ever I find myself kind of stuck and I'm like, oh, what should I be doing today? I'll go to one of the laws. It just puts me in a more motivated mood. For instance, we have the law of environment, and this just means that your surroundings can inhibit your workflow if your place is too messy, just simple things like that. And obviously there's way more that goes into just your environment, but it's a really good reminder, and I couldn't recommend this more. And now we're moving on to the last two books, and these are astrophysics books. So we have Astrophysics for People in a Hurry by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and we have A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. And both of these books are incredible. I will say that I understood A Brief History of Time a little better than I did for Astrophysics in a Hurry. There is just so much information when it comes to learning about the vast universe that it's really hard for humans to comprehend because it's not something that is physically tangible, we just have to think about it. So both of these are packed full of such thought-provoking information that will have you contemplating your existence in the universe. So I will say that Astrophysics for People in a Hurry is pretty much astrophysics for dummies. I really enjoyed the start of the book because it starts from when there was nothing to where we are today, which is mind-blowing when you are reading it. And A Brief History of Time is also astrophysics and astronomy combined, and it talks about everything that is in the night sky, all the way down to everything around us. Even thinking about it now gives me chills, because to think that I'm sitting here right now, flying through space, talking to a camera. I can't. So those are all of my favorites of 2022. That was quite a bit. If you made it this far, thanks so much for hanging out with me and sitting with me through this long video of me ranting about my favorite books. It's been a great time. I would love to hear if you have any favorites of 2022. Drop them below. I'm always looking for book recommendations, and I love to read books that other people are reading so I can talk to people about it, because I just don't have any avid reader friends, and I would really like more of them. So I'm hoping it's one of you. Anyways, I guess the next time that I'll see you, it will be 2023. So I hope that you have a wonderful New Year's Eve and a wonderful New Year's Day, and you write down all of your goals, and I'm just wishing you the best. So I will see you guys next year.